Hi, Julie. Hi, everyone. Welcome. Happy Friday, almost Shabbat Shalom. Okay, so we are right in the middle of the Torah, right in the middle of the book of Vayikra, Leviticus. This is one of my favorite Parshiot Torah portions, and I've actually taught it either once or twice for my Jewish learning before. I can't recall. So I'm happy to revisit it again. And for me, at least, on the heels of this past week, and there were some social media firestorms in the Jewish community the weeks before, and I feel like thinking about holiness and the ethics of our behavior is very, I guess it's always very timely, but it feels particularly timely this week. So what we are going to do together is read a chunk of text from Leviticus 19, from Vayikra Yud Het, and think about what is holiness. And I will suggest a definition. And also we'll bring in other scholars and their perspectives and opinions on holiness. And I'll be, of course, interested in your thoughts, and we'll end hopefully on an inspiring note. So I always say at the beginning also that, you know, not everybody has the opportunity to share what they might want to. So if you'd like to go ahead and write down my email, you're welcome to do that, abby@explorejewish.com, and I will try to get back to you in a timely way. I also want to share, I don't see the chat very frequently during our time together. Sometimes I try and get a glimpse, but I'm looking at you and I'm looking at the texts, and I'm looking at my outline, and I just don't always get to see it really, maybe once or twice. And at the end, I try and take a quick glance. So really, if you didn't get to say something that you want to say, you can email me, and I will try my best to get back to you as soon as possible. And again, the email is abby@explorejewish.com. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and share my screen, and I'll try and go in and out of screen sharing. So bear with me. Just bear with me for another second because I just don't see my screen. Okay, I think this is it. Okay. So there was feedback last time that the text should be bigger, so I did make them bigger. I hope they don't feel too big for people, but you can adjust your own screen as you see fit. And also I do want to say a note about the Hebrew, that there's a lot of punctuation on the Hebrew side. So if you're a fluent Hebrew reader or speaker, the text I originally copied quite a few years ago from a website called Machon Mamre, which I think a lot of people used to use, and now a lot of people use Safaria. And so I've edited over time a little bit to try and get rid of the superfluous punctuation, but bear with me, there is some additional punctuation that eventually I'll work to edit out. So I'm going to go ahead and start off reading, just because it's the beginning of the session and there's a lot of text here and there are places that I want to pause. And after I get through a chunk of text, then I will pause and elicit some thoughts from you. So I'm going to go ahead and read in English. And again, I want us to think together about what is holiness. So please read the text with that in mind. So verse 1, God spoke to Moses saying, "Speak to the whole Israelite community and say to them, you should be holy. Kedoshim tihiyu, ki kadosh ani Hashem Elokeichem, because I, God, am holy. You should revere your mother and father. You should keep Shabbat. I am God. I am God, your God. Don't turn to idols." I'm going to skip now verses 4-8, which are all about sacrifices and idols. I'm going to shift more. I'm going to emphasize today, even though the ritual laws are here, I'm going to emphasize the interpersonal laws. So I'm going to skip to verse 9. When you reap the harvest of your land, you should not reap all the way to the edges of your field or gather the gleanings of your harvest. You should not take your vineyard bare or gather the fallen fruit of your vineyard. You should leave them for the poor and the stranger. I am God, your God. And I'm going to kind of skim what's highlighted. You shouldn't steal. You shouldn't swear falsely by God's name. Don't defraud your fellow. Don't insult someone who can't hear you. Don't put a stumbling block before the blind. If you're a judge, don't render an unfair decision. Pregnant pause there. Don't deal basely with your countrymen. Don't hate your kinsfolk in your heart. Rebuke someone so that you don't incur guilt because of them, which is a complex verse. And love your fellow as yourself. Yahavta l'reacha kamocha. And then the rest of the chapter continues with a lot of ritual types of laws, and a little bit more interpersonal, but I'll just jump ahead to table 2. Oh, this hasn't, forgot to correct it. Where you can see side by side a summary of some of the God and ritual-oriented laws in Leviticus 19, in Vayikra Yotet, and some of the ethical laws. So looking at table 2 and keeping in mind what we just read, I want to ask for 2 or 3 brief responses. What is holiness based on Leviticus 19? And I know there's some ways you could jump ahead here, but if you can focus on the text itself and the summary, I'm interested in 2 or 3 of your responses. What is holiness? Brief responses, please. So I see Esther raising her hand. Esther, you got to unmute.
Yeah. Well,
thank you.
I can think of 2 explanations. One is connection, like when a couple gets married, the kiddush, there are 3 times there's a repetition of kadosh, and the one that Chazal refers to is different, hevdel, separation. Be unique, be different, don't be like other people.
Okay, great. Thank you for bringing those ideas in. Esther saying that the Jewish wedding ceremony is actually called Kiddushin. So maybe there is something about Kedusha, holiness and connection. And Esther also brought in the rabbinic idea based on some other texts, not as much this one, about separation. Sometimes the rabbis refer to the laws of kashrut, the food prohibition laws in the Torah, which are also associated with explicitly Kedusha, holiness. And one of the explanations offered is that eating differently makes us separate. So that's what Esther's referring to. And I'll ask everyone, I'll remind everyone, if you use a Hebrew term, please translate it as best as possible. I try and do my best to make sure that we're all on the same page. We can all, none of us is perfect, but let's make an effort together. So I see Elaine Soloway. Hi, Elaine, raising your hand. So unmute and you can share your definition.
I have 2 thoughts. One, I think the not leaving the edges of your field says everything about treating the poor is holiness. But the one question I have is, why is everything in don'ts, in the negative? Why not?
Oh yeah.
Why did they not say do this, and why the negative?
That's a great question that I'd like to give a little more thought to. I have been asked that before. Let me think about it a little bit more. Something might come to me during our time together. I'm gonna flag it. I'm gonna put a little post-it here and see if I can remember to come back to that. It's a great question. I'm not sure off the top of my head. I'll give it some thought. Okay, let's take one more thought about, and actually, Elaine, can you say one more time your definition of holiness? You go ahead and unmute. Oh,
actually, this was my portion when I had an adult bat mitzvah at the age of 51. So
That's
but not leaving the edge of the field for the poor. I think is a symbol of holiness.
okay. So taking care of other people. That's
Right.
what I hear you're saying. Taking care.
Yeah.
Okay, great. Okay,
Okay.
one more. I see Linda's hand. Linda Rubman. Hi, Linda.
Yes, hello. So I think generally what occurs to me from the text is taking responsibility for ourselves, but also taking responsibility for the larger community. And it's not optional.
Okay. Okay, great. Thank you so much. So I can't resist sharing that I had a bat mitzvah student whose bat mitzvah was last week, and her Dvar Torah, she read at Mincha at the afternoon service last Saturday, beautifully, the beginning of this Torah portion, and she talked all about mutuality and reciprocity, the give and take, the requirement to take care of oneself and the requirement to take care of others. So I love what all three things that have been said so far: separating oneself, connection to other people, responsibility for ourselves and others, taking care of others. And I want to add on two things, really on the heels or on the shoulders of two scholars. The first is, I have quoted this before at My Jewish Learning. I've quoted Rabbi Shai Held several times. I think this is a powerful text. So I'm going to go ahead and read that, and then I'll share another thought, and we'll bring together a number of things that were said. If we take seriously the idea that God creates and loves people, then an attack on us is an assault on God. And the display of respect or love for us is a display of respect or love for God. In hurting a human being, we have hurt God. We cannot sidestep the people we have hurt on our path to God. On the contrary, God insistently directs us toward those very people. I bring in this text because one thing that we didn't talk about yet so far is that being holy is not only about interpersonal relationships. Of course, that's a huge part of it in Leviticus 19, but there's also our relationship to God. And what Rabbi Shai does is intertwine those two things together. So you can't say, I'm only being holy with respect to my relationships with other people. And you can't say, I'm only being holy by behaving appropriately in ritual ways. There has to be some kind of combination, or there is an innately combined idea of treating other people well, and I'll just say treating perhaps oneself well too, and there's a connection to a higher power or higher way of being. The other thing that I want to point out here, okay, I'm not going to go there quite yet, is that as I learned from many places, but really most recently from Professor Ben Sommer, who is a professor at JTS, who I've learned from in the past live, but I learned from him on recordings. He has a couple of recordings, I think, in connection to the Hartman website. I can't remember, the Hartman Institute out of Israel. I can't remember if it's accessible, but what is accessible is a Hadar on the Hadar website, and I've linked to it later in this doc. There's about an hour-long shiur, a class that Professor Sommer gave on holiness, and what I want to raise our awareness of is that according to Leviticus 19, and I can't resist saying also Aviva Zornberg, the scholar Aviva Zornberg, has a new book out on Leviticus, which I don't yet have, but she also has this particular perspective. Leviticus 19 requires us to do things to be holy. We're not innately holy as human beings, according to Leviticus 19. The beginning of the chapter says you should be holy, Kedoshim Tihiyu, or you will be holy, because I, God, am holy. And then these are the things that you should do. And there are other ways in the Torah that the root, kuf daled shin, is used in a hitpael format, in a reflexive format. We have to do something transformative. We have to shape something in ourselves in order to become holy. It's not automatic. So the interesting thing is, let me say one more thing, that both Ben Sommer and Aviva Zornberg use the language of aspirational. Holiness is not automatic. Holiness is aspirational. We have to earn it. And interestingly enough, in our Torah, in the Chumash or Pentateuch, there are other ideas about holiness. There isn't one way that holiness is described. So I'd like to ask for a reader on page 10, table 4. Would someone please volunteer to read this short verse? And I'm going to ask the person can read it in Hebrew or English or both. So who would like to volunteer to read Deuteronomy chapter 7, verse 6? I see Danielle. So Danielle, you can go ahead and unmute, and thank you for volunteering.
כי עם קדוש אתה לאדוני אלוהיך, בך בחר אדוני אלוהיך להיות לו לעם סגולה מכל העמים אשר על פני האדמה.
Okay, great. Danielle, thank you so much. You want to read the English too?
For you are a people holy to God your God. It is you whom God your God chose for him as a treasured people amongst all people that are on the face of the ground.
Okay, beautiful. Thank you, Danielle. So what I want to point out here, and there are many other verses, Ben Sommer, if you listen to his shiur, he quotes the number of times the root kuf dalet shin, holy, is used in Leviticus and other texts that scholars consider priestly texts. And he describes how in Deuteronomy, the root holy is used much less frequently, but still used. And in Deuteronomy, there is a much more, I guess I would say basic, I have to give that some more thought, basic description of holiness. It's not aspirational in Deuteronomy. So in our Torah, we are described as a holy nation to God. We didn't have to do anything necessarily to earn it. We're holy. Whereas in many, many other texts in the Torah, like in the Leviticus 19, in those passages that we read, we have to work for it. And I'm curious, before we move any further, what people think. We'll take 2 or 3 responses. What resonates more with you? Is it that we are innately holy as human beings? Or is it that we have to work hard, let's say ritually and interpersonally, to become holy? So you can go ahead and raise your hand, and I'm going to call on people that haven't yet spoken. I see Gerald. Gerald, do you want to go ahead? Gerald Gordon, you want to go ahead and unmute?
I wanted to say that it seems to me there's another factor involved, and that is the land itself is holy, as we're told by Elohim. And we as a holy people must prove ourselves to be worthy of living in the land. And I think that's an obligation that God, or a condition that God requires of us if we are to be successful in the land of Israel, a holy land. This is one of the terms we have to meet.
Gerald, just to clarify, you're bringing in the aspect of land? Are you saying
the physical land to which God brought us is deemed holy, and we're told, at one point that to continue to live there or to live there, we must be holy, and if we fail to be holy, we will be expelled from that land.
Right. Okay, so I hear you saying, if I'm not mistaken, that for you, what makes sense the most, given what you just said about land as well, is that holiness is aspirational. We do have to work for it. We're not innately holy. we may have the potential to be holy, but we do have to work for it.
Yeah, and if
That
there's
resonates more,
the
okay.
negative side of that is if we don't, we will be expelled
Right.
from the land.
Right. Correct. Yes, I hear you. Absolutely. Okay. Thank you very much. Okay. Another, I'm curious, which resonates more, working for holiness or acknowledging perhaps that we as human beings are innately holy? So I see Stephen Lamb at the top of my screen. So I'll call on Stephen.
Unmute. Okay. Am I unmuted? Yes.
Yes.
My preference is the aspirational. It feels more Jewish to me that you live your Judaism and your holiness in the way you live your life, as opposed to the other, which sounds like you've been baptized already, you've been saved. That's not the Jewish way of thinking.
Okay, very interesting. I appreciate that the aspirational resonates more with you. For me as well. I will say sometimes we think, and I hope you don't mind my saying this, I'll say to everyone, sometimes when we often hear maybe a belief expressed in the Torah that we haven't quite thought about before, and we think it doesn't sound Jewish, you know? But I am suggesting that actually both are certainly biblical sentiments or expressions of holiness, and you know, sometimes we can challenge our notions of what it means to be Jewish and what is expressed in our text. But I certainly appreciate your sharing the way that non-aspirational piece sounds. Let's shift a little bit and hear the way that Professor Summer describes combining how we might embrace both the aspirational and the automatic expressions of holiness. And I have here, I want to point out, I know this is generally a pretty knowledgeable crowd here at My Jewish Learning, but I do want to point out the word machloket used in this quote. It's a machloket is a argument or a legal dispute. And there is an expression that many of you might be familiar with, that in Judaism, a machloket l'shem shamayim, a dispute for the sake of heaven, is sacred. And Jewish debate or arguments is considered a sacred endeavor. So I saw earlier Bimaya raising her hands to read. And I wonder, Bimaya, would you like to read this text? This Ben Summer text?
Yes, I sure will.
Okay, great, thanks.
Okay, so the Torah puts these ideas together, and probably what makes it everlasting. The editors of the Torah create a malachet in which both of these sets of ideas are present, and we as Jews have got to grab onto both and accept them as sacred, as authoritative, but at the same time, these ideas are critiquing each other. They are undermining each other and also in some ways enriching each other. And I really like this idea that they're playing against each other, because I think that, like, as a convert to Judaism with Jewish heritage, like, I feel often it's easy to want to reject something that the other group has sort of taken on as their own. But one of the things that I like to do to kind of be more inclusive is to think of it like, it seems like to me, like when you get to like the additional Greek text, all the best ideas that are there are really lifts from the Torah, you know? So I look at it as it all kind of seeds from Torah learning, right? So I don't reject anything that I can find in the Torah, those ideas, even if others have kind of co-opted them for themselves. So that does make things seem oppositional sometimes, like it says in the quote, but I don't see it that way. Because I've studied both, I can see where there was very, very Jewish ideas in the Greek text.
Yeah.
All the New
Okay. Thank you.
Testament.
Oh,
Yeah.
okay. Bimaya, thank you for sharing your thoughts, and you're leading right into our concluding conversation about, does the idea that in some ways holiness can be aspirational, and in some ways holiness perhaps is automatic, does that resonate with people, that both are relevant or both are applicable to our lives? I want to complicate the question in one other way. And you can see, if you saw, I was moving another window. I meant to put this verse in my document and I forgot. One of my favorite verses in the whole Torah is verse 8 in chapter 25 in Exodus, which is considered a text. It is considered a priestly text in line with the Leviticus 19 passage that we read. In Hebrew, Va'asuli mikdash v'shachanti b'tocham. God tells Moses to tell the people to have the people make a mikdash, a sanctuary, perhaps a temple, and the specific references to the traveling sanctuary in the desert, but some look at this as referring to the temple. Make for me a place for my presence or for sacrifices, v'shachanti b'tocham, and I, God, will dwell among the people, in the people. So this is a strange text. It sounds automatic, but some scholars argue that the holiness here is earned also, that yes, if we set aside an institution or a place for God's presence actually infiltrates out, or it spreads out into the people. So I have two questions as our concluding questions. One is the idea that holiness can sometimes be aspirational and sometimes be automatic. That combination, does that resonate for you or does it not? And how do you see this verse? Do you see this verse as aspirational or do you see it as automatic? And I am going to call on people who have not yet shared. So I see Paul with a raised hand. Paul Wilson, would you still like to share your thoughts on?
Yes, thank you. I really have enjoyed all the comments so far, yours especially, and all the other participants. 2 points. The first being that the distinction between aspirational and
Automatic.
I would rephrase as God-given in place of automatic. We are created in the image of God, therefore we have a certain degree of innate holiness. And for aspirational, I would acknowledge that as a good way of putting it, but I would say human powered, right? So it takes two to tango here. God created us in the image of holiness, and we need to complete the creation.
Okay, okay, beautiful. Okay, I think we lost Paul, but the idea, it sounds like for Paul, the combination is resonant, that as Genesis says, we were created in the image of God. It seems perhaps automatic, but we have to earn that holiness to achieve a higher state of being from, as God describes in Leviticus 19, or as the text describes in Leviticus 19. So Sherry, I saw that you were raising your hand. Would you like to share if this combination approach resonates with you, and if you'd like, on the verse in Exodus 25?
I would. When things are automatic, it feels good, it feels right, it feels like it's coming from your soul, you feel like you're connected with God. when you're struggling with something, I am struggling with something where somebody is purposefully sinning against me, and I am struggling with staying decent while also not being angry. And that is a big struggle. And I'm going to take that back. I'm angry about it. I am struggling with how to handle it. And one thing I wrote down here before, as a basis for an ethical life, how do you not hold hate in your heart? Well, I certainly don't want to hold any hate in my heart. And I also don't want to hold the anger. While my behavior may represent me well, what I'm feeling is not representing what I want to be feeling. So there is a struggle going on there. And it is quite a struggle. And I'm sure there are others who can relate to this when somebody is purposely trying to take money from you that isn't theirs and they get away with it, or, you know, it feels good to do the right thing when you're consistently not rewarded for having to deal with somebody who has purposefully done this. This session is really hitting me in the heart and soul, because doing the right thing is so very important to me, but feeling on the inside good about it is quite the struggle.
So Sherry, thank you so much for sharing your struggle this morning. I think I want to make sure that I understand correctly and kind of try and rephrase for all of us. It sounds like the automatic does resonate with you, the idea that, but it also sounds like the aspirational is sometimes extremely difficult when you feel, and what I'm going to maybe take what you're saying a step further, that perhaps there is an automatic, perhaps or God-given or innate holiness to each of us. After all, we are described as being created in the image of God, building on what was said earlier. But the aspirational is much harder, and perhaps we should not always get caught up in just saying, oh, well, I sort of like, yeah, I'm innately holy. Maybe there's something cavalier that can happen with that, but we actually, to grow as humans, we have to push ourselves to the aspirational.
I have consistently been asking myself specifically the question daily, what is it that God wants me to learn from this? And it's not pretty. It is not pretty. It doesn't mean that every moment of this is beautiful and lovely and tiptoeing through roses, or that I am beautiful and pretty and tiptoeing through roses. And I don't like looking at that side, but I know there is something to be learned here. And I thank you for this particular session. It's been particularly poignant for me. So thank you.
Oh, great. You're welcome. Thank you. So I want to just open up the conversation generally now. There were a number of questions that I asked. What resonates more for you? Is it the automatic or is it the aspirational approach? Do you accept that there's a combination that might, does that resonate for you? And also the Exodus verse that I shared with you, the idea that we build an institution, we build a sanctuary, but that there's a godliness or divinity that can affect all of us, how that fits into our conversation. So I'll open it up for responses to those questions or for general questions related to sacredness and holiness. And we'll take one or two and then check in with the time, and I'll wrap up after that. So I know Aaron Rosenthal, you had your hand up earlier, so I wanted to call on you.
Yes, I feel that Genesis is correct, Deuteronomy is correct, and Leviticus is correct, in that the universal we is holy, and it's the core of our ethics. That every human being is made in the image of God. that is the reason why we need to treat each other in an ethical way with love and respect. And we are holy in that the Jewish people are holy, in that we have a particular job, we have a special tradition, but we're not more holy than other people. We have a Torah, we have a special tradition to share with other people. And in that sense, Deuteronomy is correct. It's one thing that I really liked. Rabbi Zalman used to say, yes, the Jews have a special role, but that doesn't mean the Jews are more special than Hindus or Christians or Sikhs or Muslims. There are special roles and traditions, and we're richer and better when everyone is working together. And Leviticus is correct in that we need to struggle to reach our highest expression. I like that term of God wrestlers. When Jacob got his new name, we are the God wrestlers. And by becoming the God wrestlers, Jacob became Israel, the father of the 12 tribes. And I always like that image of the God wrestler. We wrestle, and that's when we can really reach that pinnacle. Anyway,
Yeah.
That's what I
Okay, Aaron, thank you so much. And to kind of pull together all the beautiful ideas you shared, it certainly sounds like what Ben Summer describes here, this combination, highlighting all parts of the Torah, definitely resonates with you. And I appreciate your bringing into the conversation also this idea that the Torah does seem to express that Bnei Yisrael, the Israelites, were especially holy to God. That is the description in the Torah, but that certainly does not mean that other groups, other religions are less holy. So I appreciate your bringing that into the conversation too. So we'll take one more. I see Josie also with a hand up.
Hello, good morning.
Hi, good morning.
I'm on the Kedoshim. I understand it to be a set apart people. And as the gentleman right before me was speaking, it came to me that God calls his Hebrew people Ami Segula, a special people. And because he gave us his Torah, his 613 instructions, that we have a purpose to lead the way in our actions, whether they be automatic or, as you had said earlier, aspirational. We all want to achieve a better place. Some in the world, some in their job. But I think what we do, like today, I was able to join this beautiful Torah study, Shabbat study, Torah portion study, that God is bringing the culture of the Hebraic people back into the light to shine in the midst of everything that's going on in the world, worldwide.
Okay, Josie, thank you so much. Thank you very, very much. I appreciate your mentioning the Am Segula nation, the Am Segula language, that phrase that's used in the in text 4, table 4 that we looked at, which is used in other parts of the Torah, that does kind of seem to speak more to the automatic holiness piece. And Josie, thank you so much for your other thoughts as well. I want to wrap up by saying, and I'll share my screen one more time for this piece, that, and I'll kind of work backwards here by saying that the verse in Exodus, while it is, I think, generally accepted as a verse that expresses that the Israelites have to work for their holiness, it does seem to say something a little different to me. It does seem to, actually, as I'm thinking about it, I think I'm changing my mind. So I will say, I think the verse, although it seems that it could be an innate kedusha or holiness that's mentioned when the direction is given for the Israelites to build a sanctuary, and thus God will dwell, divinity will dwell among the people, it does seem like something has to happen first in order for the people to earn their holiness. And I think the reason I got to that today is because although I certainly appreciate the idea that there are multiple facets and multiple expressions of an idea in the Torah, for me today, in May 2022, for me, what the take on holiness, or the expression of holiness that is not automatic or not innate, but asks me to work harder to be a better person, that is what speaks to me today. I think coming at the end of this week with news from Israel last night, and for me, and the news in the United States this week, and again, I mentioned there were some like Jewish communal social media storms over the past couple of weeks. This Torah portion could not have come at a better time for me to ask me to think about, how can you do better? How can you treat others more respectfully? And certainly the ritual piece I would think about as well, and ask myself to stretch in that way too. But I think in this moment in time, the aspirational perspective on holiness, the texts that ask me to work harder and do something different and push myself, that's what really resonates the most. So with whatever aspect of holiness resonates more for you, I wish you meaningful thinking and feeling on this big concept in our Torah, in the Torah. And I certainly wish you also, I hope we all can push ourselves to do better and be inspired by these ancient texts, not just this week at Parashat Kedoshim, but each week. So thank you very much for joining us today, and I'll look forward to teaching again in a couple of months. And I wish everyone a Shabbat Shalom, a peaceful weekend, and week ahead.